Hello.
Hi, Amanda.
Hi, Lauren.
Let's
How are
get-
you?
I'm doing great. I am excited to kick off this month's Rising Tide. Today, our guest is Amanda Kahalahoy, the COO of Vicious Biscuit. And today we are talking all things franchising, specifically what is a good foundation and groundwork for franchisor growth. And this is a great conversation. I am so excited to have Amanda on today as one of the instrumental leaders behind the scalability and growth of Vicious Biscuit as a franchisor and also a corporate owner operator. Today, we are going to be covering a number of topics from franchise structure and organization, operations, brand marketing strategies, financial management, legal issues, strong relationships with your franchisees, and so much more. We've got a ton to cover, so I want to jump right in. So I want to invite everyone in the audience today to please shoot us your questions. You can do that in the Q&A section. So we will be monitoring that throughout the presentation and try to weave in our answers as best we can. We'll also try our best to leave some time at the end for any of the remaining questions that we have today. This series is one of 3 Rising Tide series on franchising. So while this one's on franchisor point of view, we want to invite you to make sure you're in our next 2 as well that are focusing on the franchise relationship. So let's kick this off today. Amanda, thank you so much for joining us.
Thank you so much for inviting me, Lauren. It's a pleasure to be here.
Yes, let's get right into this. So you guys are fairly new as a franchisor. And I want to dive right into just sort of some of the foundational questions in and around the idea of your franchise structure and your organization. What were some of the biggest challenges you faced in the early days of you deciding to scale through franchising? And let's talk about kind of what those were and how you guys tackled them at Vicious Biscuit.
Yeah, that's a great question, Lauren, because when you really begin the journey to franchising, you're probably starting out, especially if you're an emerging brand, one that maybe hasn't been around a long time or doesn't have, maybe 20 plus units or a lot of corporate structure. You have a fairly homegrown team. So I think one of the greatest challenges that emerging franchisors face is how to allocate their resources of people, the human capital component. A lot of your folks have come up through the operational components of the system. So some of them have started out as just kind of the frontline workers of your team. And they've evolved over that time to move into maybe some operational oversight roles. And then you're developing to kind of work the business in ways that are more administrative or back office support. So I think one of the immediate challenges that we had was how do we scale franchising and support these franchisees while also developing our own corporate structure? And it was really identifying leaders in our organization, ones that could fill and just kind of place our aces in our places, if you will, that could fill roles to be support to the franchisees, because we knew that was the fundamental piece, that if we were going to franchise, we knew we have a great concept, we have a great brand. That's a great recipe to franchise. But at the end of the day, the franchisees would require support from us. So it was identifying what were the key positions that we needed to provide support. And we knew the number one was training. So developing a really robust training team, the operational support, and then of course, just administrative support. Some franchisees, especially if you have a healthy mix of those various avatars, they might not know the fundamentals of restaurant administration, back office systems. It's very different than other businesses. So really the key challenge in the beginning was identifying who was going to be in a support function and how were we going to support the G&A of franchising, because that is a material investment up front.
It is. And I think that's something that we see often, that a lot of emerging franchisors, if I could identify an early and frequent mistake that we see, is everyone assumes that there are obviously startup costs to operating as a franchisor, and they think it's the legal and the marketing and the sales function.
Mm.
But it's so much more than that, and the support that you are offering to franchisees in exchange in part for that royalty rate. And
That's
so
correct.
candidly, we see a range of behaviors in this space. And I love the way that you thought about it as, okay, we have a core team. What do we have that can serve these needs? And what are the immediate needs that we have to staff for our franchisees.
Mhm.
I think there's even a secondary piece to this where you think, okay, here's the primary state of us as a franchisor, where we have some corporate employees kind of bridging the gap. And then
Correct.
there's the best practice for, like, let's say maybe we get 10 units deep and we have more royalty stream and we can add X head count. And then the future state where you're fully baked out and you've got all of the, aces in places and maybe some hires that are only and exclusively for the franchise system even.
Mhm.
But I don't know many franchisors who give it that much thought. I was really impressed with the fact that you guys didn't just give it thought about, okay, there's the right now, but there's also the future state.
Yes.
And that future state, you said something very interesting that I wanted to kind of go back to when you and I were talking, and it was that it doesn't have to be a full-time headcount, that it can
Correct.
be a mix. And
Correct.
talk to me a little bit about how you view that mix and how you fill the gaps for franchisee support with a number of different resources.
Yeah. So what we did was we kind of put it in buckets, right? So when you're developing, even corporately, right, you can quickly identify where you need specific operational and or, corporate structure to fulfill, I guess, the challenges at the time. Everybody has a challenge that they're trying to overcome, right? So we knew very beginning operations was where we had to fill in. That is a full-time role, right? And then training, while has now become full-time because we are officially 10 units deep now, what we did was, we developed trainers within our core heritage market that, they were overlaying kind of two responsibilities, right? When we weren't training new, corporate team members as we were scaling development and or franchisees, they're operating within the restaurants as assistant managers or corporate trainers. So, they're full-time, but they're full-time in kind of two positions at that point. So that's only the small buckets, right? We obviously need administrative support and oversight within our corporate structure. So our office manager, who's also now our franchise liaison, again, it was a full-time need. We needed somebody to help with accounts payable and, just communicating with our vendors. We realized that was a core position that needed to be here, is that administrative support, someone to liaison between, franchise and corporate locations and kind of the rest of our either back office team and or our vendors. On the marketing side, we knew we needed somebody in-house to facilitate marketing when franchising came into play, because there are various guardrails and there's agencies to manage, but we knew we didn't need necessarily a CMO on our staff, and we didn't need a full-time PR person on our staff or, a full-time social media person. So we allocated, we recognized that where we needed experts and experience, those were the positions that we outsourced, right? So operationally, supply chain, I don't need somebody in-house full-time supply chain. Those are resources that you can allocate to consultants. Same with marketing. You can find great fractional marketing, CFOs or VP of marketing that can really help structure what maybe your franchise agreement looks like, what foundational requirements that you'll need to scale franchising, making sure that you have a solid plan and calendar. Those are resources that you don't need full-time, but you do need experience. So what we did was really identify, where do we need the most experience, knowing that we couldn't afford them full-time when we were emerging, and we found them in kind of that, PTE and or consulting, you know, space. And that's what's really helped us drive the brand, but at minimal expense to us.
I love some of these strategies because they're things that we even know to be true as operators, right? That cross-training employees inside a restaurant in multiple areas works,
Yes.
right? So
Yes.
now you're taking that solution and scaling it up above store level to say, okay, AGM, how about you get an extra certification and then you can be a trainer for us too?
Correct.
I think it's brilliant. I've actually weirdly never seen that done before. And it makes so much sense, right? Because you want a trainer who deeply understands the restaurant and what it is to walk in a shift. And it's not that I've seen trainers who are good at having that level of empathy and understanding, but it's a different animal when you've been running a restaurant for a few months and you know all the things that can go sideways. So I'm hazarding a guess here that your trainers are probably even more effective because they've run units and they've operated some of the company's stores.
I will be so candid, ironic. So our training team just came back Tuesday from our third franchise on-site training
Mhm.
soft opening. And the feedback we received from the franchisee brought tears to all of our eyes because they were so deeply invested in the culture of the brand. It's great to hear a franchisee say you have great product and you have a great structure and you have great systems. That's great. But when they walk away and they say it was the culture piece that really set us apart, especially when they are a franchisee of another concept, that
Yeah.
makes all the difference. This team, and they're fairly tenured. We're talking individuals that have been with the brand for 4 years. The brand is only 6 years old. So they've been
Mhm.
here for the longevity of the brand. They take so much more than just operations. They take really just they step into that space. They take ownership of their responsibility and what they're bringing to the concept and its growth. And we have it as a part of our kind of path to leadership, if you will, right? So they come in as frontline, they cross train, they can move into the role of a team leader, then a corporate trainer, then perhaps they can move into a management or leadership role. So that's how we position it that way, is really as a growth opportunity for them. Because if you can train it, you can lead it, and then you can continue to develop and train leaders underneath you. And we've done really well to build a bench in that way. And we've done that corporately too, not just four-wall operations. My director of marketing came in as our area director. And
Mhm.
having that operational emotional intelligence
Yeah.
has made her so successful in that corporate position. I will tell you, every corporate team member came from operations.
Yeah, we believe strongly in that too. I
Yeah.
think something that resonates strongly across the full course team is having that level of perception, deep understanding, and experience all
Mhm.
fuels your emotional intelligence and your empathy when you're
Yes.
trying to sit in your seat and be an expert, whether you're in supply chain or finance or you're in marketing on our team. The fact that we've all kind of been in those operator shoes matters. I really
Yes.
think it does make a difference. And you feel very strongly about company stores, and I want to hear your kind of point of view on this, because
Sure.
there's a wide range and school of thought that you can franchise pretty much anything as long as there's a door open. And that's kind of one extreme, like one unit is enough. And then there's, I think a school of thought that it's 5+ company stores. And I would love to kind of hear your perspective, because we know you're an operator at heart, right? And you feel very strongly about that operations background. Talk to me about your company store strategy at Vicious Biscuit and how it feeds and supplements and supports your franchise system.
Yeah, so you're right. I remember us discussing this, and I feel very strongly about more than two. And I would say at minimum
Why? Say more.
I would say at minimum 3 or 4. I think a lot of people, and I can say this retroactively, right? In hindsight, the experience. I think a lot of folks, when they open a single unit concept, right, it takes off, it's a hit, and they immediately think, okay, so I can duplicate this in store number 2. And they generally can, right? Especially if they've built it out concentrically in their market, they have great brand awareness. Maybe it's alleviating some pressure from store number 1, and it takes off really well. It's really great that you can do that in your core market, but opening a corporate location in a market that you have no brand awareness, maybe it's a state away, or maybe it's, just completely a different trade area, is very, very different than opening within your heritage market, where maybe you are, that's the beauty of franchising, right? Especially if you find a franchisee that's very locally centric. A lot of times your success also becomes from the relationships within your community. Our strategy was to test different markets because, here in Charleston, right, #1 travel destination in the world. Mount Pleasant is a fairly affluent market, but it's also a tourist market. Somerville is about, half hour, 45 minutes away from Charleston, very much a very dense residential, but also strong workforce population. Very different markets, but both very, very successful. But they also have, concentric brand awareness. So we then tested markets and various others, most of them that were not core concentric. So that would be my first recommendation for you for many, many reasons. But we had the opportunity to test different demographics. And that's what I would say is really essential for 2 parts to have more than 2 locations. Number one, you really get to identify who is your core customer. Nothing is going to help you scale as a franchisor than knowing who your core customer is. If you do not know who to market to and you do not know where you need to be, it's very hard to be successful in franchising. You need to
Yeah.
know that. And the only way to know that, so while operator at heart, I'm really data driven at heart. So for me, the more data that I can get, and that's what we got from 6 restaurants, you can really identify who's your core customer, and that'll make you successful in scaling. The other piece of it is, and this is more on the development side, when you open number one, you've recorded nothing. You went through the process. It was probably very challenging, very stressful. Maybe you've never done it before. And then, number two is a little easier, but you've probably still never recorded the process. The purpose of franchising is to duplicate, duplicate, duplicate. So you need to, in those subsequent locations, and that's when I said 3 and 4, because when we opened 3 and 4, that's when we really got granular with, okay, how do we open a restaurant? What is every single step? And I will tell you on an Excel sheet for restaurants 3, 4, and 5, 6, we recorded everything that we did from the time that we did it, from the time we signed a lease to the time that we had permitting, what vendors, what time they needed to come in. And we had some significant learning. Some vendors we brought in too late, some of them we didn't bring in at the right time. But what I will tell you is if you go through those processes and you build the foundation on duplication from training to operations to menus to vendor relationships and scheduling to your opening checklist, you will open franchisees on time, which will give you a lot of integrity in their mind, right? They'll have a lot of, belief in what you're doing. But second, you'll open them on time. We have had all of our franchisees open within 1 week of the date that which we had on our pre-scheduling checklist 9 months prior. And that's pretty significant when you consider all of the delays that most people are experiencing with equipment and permitting and otherwise. But when you're granular in your checklist and you keep on them, they feel so confident in what you're building. And that makes a significant difference. And they feel so supported. And, and it justifies what you're charging them, from franchise fee to, royalty fees.
Yeah. And how do you deliver that training initially and over time, right? Because there's such a steep learning curve in learning how to not just get the restaurant open, but getting trained on how to run it properly. So a franchisee's operational and training needs in sort of like day one of grand opening through, month 3 are very different than like a year later,
Yes.
right? Talk to me a little bit about some of the techniques and resources that you guys use as a team to kind of keep that train going, like you keep moving it forward.
Yes, that's a great question. So I'll preface the question first with, if you want to franchise, you have to be ready to make a fairly significant investment in systems. So I will tell you, one of the challenges with franchising as an emerging brand is what you lack is geography. So you're scaling your brand. So unless you're scaling your franchisees really close to HQ, which generally you're not, right? Especially if you're developing corporately, you tend to keep your, either your state or your region corporate, because that's where your team is, and you're franchising outward from there. So one thing that you have to consider is, how long can you truly bring somebody in to headquarter training? Because your operators are going to have families, your franchisees will have families. They also have a restaurant under construction. Some of them might have another job right now until that you open the restaurant. You logistically can't bring them in for 8 to 10 weeks of training. And it's also of significant cost. So I would say training is probably the most overlooked, but probably the most fundamental foundation you need to have in for franchising. So you have to be really creative. And the way to be creative with that is what we did was we built out an entire learning management system. We said, what are the things that we can teach a franchisee from afar during the construction process that maybe, we can segment over an 8-week period, right? Here's the date that you start this. You need to finish this by the time you come to HQ. And that was the solution. Because what we do is, it's brand, it's culture, it's point of sale. While they don't have necessarily the on-the-job training, they have the familiarity with the systems that you have. And then you can teach them menu and recipes and build, so that when they come here, they are diving in and they already know these key components. They know the foundational elements. So for ours, our training is about 3.5 weeks on site at HQ. Which when we first built it out in our mind, it was 6 to 8 weeks. So we augmented that with the digital learning system. So all that classroom training is done before. And then
Mhm.
they come here, they spend a week in the front, week in the back, and basically a week of they're the GM of our restaurant and they're running it, in shifts in all of those various positions. And then we've broken it up too. So we've allowed them to come for 2 weeks, go home for 2 weeks, come back, just in fairness to families. So there's been a lot of consideration to that, and it's worked very well. We bring them in, probably they finish about 3 weeks before they actually have their soft opening, so
Mhm.
that there's not a lot of lapse between the time they're here with the brand and opening. And that's really important too. You don't want them to be too detached from the brand. And then our team comes in for 2 weeks and trains we train them for about 4 to 5 days before the soft opening. And then we're there providing, oversight and operational support and training for 2 weeks on boots on the ground. So they're getting about 6 weeks of real on the job training with us. And then, a few weeks of learning management. So I would say, and then that learning management system not only allows you to train your franchisees, but you use that for your corporate and franchise system. So all of the front of house, frontline workers, back of house, they all use that same system so that you're scaling that same message no matter where you are. It's not just the franchisee training their staff. They're getting that corporate training and getting familiar with the corporate team.
It's so important. And I think while there's investment in this from a financial and time point of view, I cannot state this enough. Like it just reinforces the brand over and over. And if you are using the same tools that you built for your franchise system to help maintain standards, even in your own company stores, like that to me is just really best in class, right? To have those types of resources. So you're leveraging the things that can be taught and need to be taught standardized,
Yes.
that are part of the brand, are in that LMS. They're traceable and trackable for you and for your team. I'm just thinking, even from an operations perspective, if you're a GM and you're trying to raise up talent even within your own location, whether you're a franchisee or you're corporate, to have those resources available so the training isn't something that you have to do on the job. Right.
Correct.
So many times I see a static 3-ring binder, the dreaded 3-ring binder, and it's like brand standards or ops manual, and they literally hand it to an employee and they go, "Here you go. We'll see you tomorrow. I'll update your name tag to say AGM." And it's like, what? Like, there's
It,
not a lot of time and space that is just exists in restaurants and the pace of them to be able to appropriately train. And that's one of the challenges, I think, with on the job training in restaurants. So having an LMS makes so much sense to me. And you're right, it is an investment. There are affordable options out there. How did you guys arrive at the decision to go to an LMS? Because I'll be honest, that's something that we don't see early brands do. And I'm thinking that this is something coming back from your own military background, because you're a veteran, right? Like you've served. And I can't help but notice that sometimes when people come into the restaurant industry from other places, they bring these amazing best practices with them. And I don't know if that's where you got it, but so much of the way you're talking about consistent training, routine, standardization, and really just the organization and the way your brain works. I'm fangirling so hard right now, but I have to guess that this has to come from some of your past experience. I'm
yes,
just
it's a hybrid of that, but also my background is in technology. So anywhere that I can
okay.
use technology to supplement, that was one of the things that I brought to the brand, from back of house systems like Restaurant 365. It's okay. That was one of the challenges. What I saw immediately coming not from the restaurant space into the restaurant space is how afraid restaurateurs are of technology, but they all use this every single day.
Yeah.
So for me, and the other thing too is, so it was exactly what you said. And I uploaded it to something I sent you today. What do I do with 400 pages of an operations manual? When
Yeah.
I actually received it and looked at it, I said, nobody's ever going to read this. People today absorb content in very small snippets.
Right.
And you also have to consider the audience, right? Who's going to be looking at this? You're not talking, in general, they're not going to be PhD scholars who have spent their life reading literary texts, in mass. These are people that, probably are kinesthetic learners, right? They're learning on the job. That's why they're in this. They love hospitality. They love people. They like the experiential piece. So you have to give them content that which they can absorb in small snippets, but it's engaging. So when I saw that operations manual, I knew it wasn't duplicatable. And I also had to solve for how do I get training? Because I heard my operator loud and clear, an operator that has been in the business for, 20 plus years, came from major brands before him and said, there's no way we condense this training. I'm like, well, that's a problem. This is the military, right? It's an adapt and overcome scenario. Well, we have to because financially we can't, franchisees are not going to sign an agreement knowing that they have to spend $50,000 to send their team to training. They're just not going to do it and or keep them away from their families for 6 to 8 weeks. So it became necessity, but we also recognize it was a great way to scale within our own as a whole as a system, right? Because we're never going to give a front of house employee an operations manual to read. They're not, but I can give them, 2 hours of training to look at that they'll consume while they're working in the first piece. So it was twofold. It was really twofold to ensure that we could scale long-term, to condense the training timeline and really save costs for both us and the franchisees, because it might be an initial investment up front, but think about all of the time and salaries I'm saving by not having my corporate trainers training these individuals for 4 additional weeks on site.
Mm-hmm. Mm-hmm. I couldn't agree more. And you want those on-site moments. That's high value time, right? You've got your team there, they're on corporate campus, they're away from their families, and you want that time to be purposeful, meaningful, and sticky. You want them to remember it. I think there's something to this 1-2 punch that you've got where you've got the asynchronous remote learning, and then you come and you reinforce it. And then they're immediately in their own unit within 3 weeks, I think is actually one of the best ideas I've seen. And that's why I wanted to spend a minute like really unpacking this for people, because even as someone who's, even on our team, we build training programs, we support them in other franchise concepts, sometimes even when they're not our investments. Right. I've also been a franchisee and received what I would consider to be some best in class training. And this is just even a notch above. So I really wanted to dive deep in that. But there are some other areas, right? When we're talking about why franchising exists, right? We're in a mutually beneficial relationship that's designed to hopefully make a very profitable business that's run by one of your franchisees. That's the whole point, right? And there's often a lot of debate and discussion around the marketing fund and the ad fund and the dollars that are all kind of in and around marketing and PR. And for a brand that is so buttoned up operationally, but also just has a phenomenal brand put together around these operations, I would love to kind of just go in on your thinking on brand and market, all things marketing, if we can go there. How do you view that dichotomy and that balance, that natural friction that exists between the franchisees having their own ideas and their own kind of marketing agenda and knowing their home market, and you and the team being the governors and the shepherds and the Sherpas of, if you will, of the marketing spend from the ad fund and of the brand itself? How do you manage that kind of tension, if you will?
So this is where I'm going to go back to our first conversation about who to bring in when. The best decision we made as a brand was to bring in a CMO, a fractional CMO, before we franchised. The foundational and an experienced one that came from 700 plus unit brands in franchising, because what she brought to the table, and this is Catherine Hull, my fractional CMO, was, Amanda, here are all of the challenges you're going to have marketing to franchisees. It's probably the largest hot button that you will have with them, aside from just, supply chain and, whatever creative ideas they have around the menu and operations. It's marketing, because they are paying into it and they also have their own allocation of regional spend. And she said, so we need to make sure that we have core standards in place ahead of franchising so they know the guardrails at which they have to operate. Establishing those guardrails from the beginning, and sure, they're going to evolve. They always do, because the landscape of marketing feels like it changes every other week. Having them in place before you start franchising sets the precedent. Because if you don't start it with franchisee number one and you do something different, it's number one, very hard to pull back with that franchisee. because your first one's always going to be the most challenging because it is the first one. And you are going to bend the rules a little bit and you're going to do things differently because it's your first one to go through. But as it's harder later in the system when you are trying to have control of all of these various elements, especially of your brand standard, it's better to have those in place now. So, some of the things that we did from the beginning was we're not going to allow franchisees the creative freedom to have their own social media. We wanted to control that for various reasons: reputation management, to ensure the correct creative, to ensure the appropriate marketing based on our calendar, and just so that the brand we were efficient with our spend as well. Because if we have this franchisee over here doing this and corporate's doing this, your spend isn't really allocating appropriately and you have no measurement of data. Again, data is very important to me. So we wanted that in place and we wanted to make sure the creative, the brand standards, the marketing were all consistent. Now, can they submit to us a special promotion? Absolutely, but it's a workflow. And the other thing, it allows you not to have franchisees go rogue and post something inappropriate and or just not to brand that could potentially be a liability. So that was important to us from the beginning. I think the way that we balance it is brand marketing is brand marketing. So, we have our PR person that we use, we have our agency that we use, we have a local store marketing handbook that's very, very robust, but we do allow them creative freedom in their local marketing. So the things that they want to do, the causes that which they want to, but they have to go through an approval process. So developing a standard and a plan for them, and a lot of them don't have this structure. What I've noticed from other brands is they don't have a structure around local store marketing. It's just, here, go spend 1%. So we built it out. We actually built out the plan for them. You should spend about 60% on this, 20% on that, 10% on this, and we give them a little guidance. Plus, we give them an annual marketing calendar so they know what they should be spending those resources on. So it's most effective for their spend. But it gives them creative freedom. Hey, you want to go sponsor the baseball team? Great, do it. That's awesome. Make sure you use the appropriate marks. So make sure we see the uniform before you do it. You want to go and spend money on mailers? Great. Let us know what you're thinking in terms of your call to action, because we might have done it before and it wasn't very effective. And we can give you some metrics around that. So I think for, keeping your brand consistent is the most important thing you can do in franchising. So I like to have more control than not, maybe a little bit of a control freak over brand and marketing, but I think it's the one component aside from operations that you have to have the most control over.
Yes, I want to talk to you about some of your strategies because I've seen you guys as a brand execute across so many different strategies. But before we jump to that topic, I want to go back to something you said. The lawyer in me loves this. So I'm going to dive bomb out and take this nugget out, because if you missed it, Amanda, you said something really important. You have an approval process.
Yes.
And you set an expectation with, this is what LSM looks like. This is what local store marketing looks like. This is what good looks like. And here's how it plays out in an annual calendar. So it's not just hey, here are the guide rails on the brand and what you can and can't do. If you want to step out of the rails, here is an approval process. And by the way, when you're spending money over here, how we suggest you spend it, you still have to go through this approval process here. And I am routinely shocked at some of the biggest brands we've seen and worked with in my career that do not have that. And so you see all kinds of crazy stuff that isn't just about the sanctity and the consistency of the brand. It actually can create legal risk when your franchisees are out there doing things that are unchecked and unmitigated. So I just wanted to kind of really bold underline that as a strategy, because it just sounded like another thing that you guys do, which is great, but it's actually not as normal as one would think. And it's so, so important.
I've talked to some very large brands that have, 30 plus, I mean, I shouldn't say very large, but, obviously larger than us, 30 plus to 50 plus units that do not have any of these components in place. And they allow so much freedom within their marketing. But I think what the other piece of it is, the marketing, brand awareness is the greatest challenge for any emerging brand. So when you have inconsistent messaging, you're actually doing a disservice to the brand awareness. So one thing that we do, and even our marketing calendar, it's like, here's our primary message, here's our secondary message, even down to our cashier upselling, all ties back to that. The PR piece, not just on even just consumer PR, but franchise PR. You
Mhm.
have to hit all the touch points at the same time. And then we do the same with LSM. So they have to give us their quarterly calendar as an approval process, and it has to tie back to the marketing calendar because unless, there's obviously some, I'm sure they have something local in their
Yeah.
markets too, but if you market to the calendar or you market to what the brand knows is driving traffic, you are hitting all of those layers of marketing and verticals, and that gets you awareness, and that's what drives traffic.
I couldn't agree more. And if you think about how consumers are intaking all of these touch points from the brand,
Mhm.
it's almost as if you are singing from the same song sheet in all of these various digital formats. And the harmony of that all goes back to kind of reinforce the consumer confidence in the brand. It's so subliminal and so psychological. But when there's a discord in there and one thing doesn't match the messaging of everything else,
Correct.
consumers feel it. They may not actually be able to specifically identify it because we're nerdy on this stuff, but like I do. Like I can immediately spot when a brand is putting out PR that's saying one thing and yet the brand is on paper doing something very different.
Correct.
And I think this is a very compelling argument for especially why in early stage brands, all of those pieces of communication for the brand, whether it's about development and selling franchises, or it's about the grand opening plan or the local store marketing, or how a founder is giving a PR interview, giving an interview to press, all have to be singing from the same song sheet, which I think is yet another reason why having that level of strategy from a fractional CMO and having that expertise was a brilliant move there
Yeah,
too.
it saved us a lot of time and probably headache. We obviously used her for other reasons too. We had an AAU study done just so that we knew our core customer. But I would say one other really important foundational piece to put in place for the brand when you're scaling, not only for franchising in particular, is to have very robust brand guidelines. Because you will need to give that to agencies. You will need to teach your franchisees. This is how we talk about the brand. This is the tone of the brand. This is the message house for the brand. These are the
Mhm.
ways we do not speak about the brand. My don't list for the brand was larger than my do list for the brand initially, because I'll tell, as an emerging concept, sometimes you will have different agencies, right? You'll have a franchise agency, you'll have a consumer agency. I would send the initial brand book out to two different agencies, and it's like they saw the brand in two completely different lights. So
Yeah.
really making sure that your franchisees have the education around your mission, your values, and even just how to use your marks, how uniform standards are, colors, photography. There's so many layers to how your brand is
Yeah.
represented, and making that investment is significant because it'll save you a lot of time, energy, and headache when you are trying to outsource some of these key components to digital and to PR and to even just in-store collateral. If you don't have any means where there's no consistency around how to create collateral, it's very challenging. So brand book, very important too in the beginning.
I agree. And I would even argue, as someone who's been sort of the lawyer reviewing these, I cut my teeth learning how to do this on one of the most iconic brands in the world, Coca-Cola. I live here in Atlanta, and years ago when I was in law school, ironically, I saw the brand book that came across, and they had at the time, this was 20 plus years ago, they had one that was designed specifically for vendors and then
Mhm.
what was designed for strategic partners and community partners.
Okay.
So there were use cases for the brand book in different instances. And I could not agree more that I think when you're talking to vendors who are going to be generating marketing materials for your brand,
Mhm.
things like the brand story and the tone, right? And the
Very important.
attitude and the personality of the brand are even they're just as important as like the angle of the photography. We don't like stuff that's super close up. We do back with a fuzzy background, like just things
Correct.
like that are highly technical that I'll be honest, most
Nobody
of
knows.
the franchisees, it's just going to go like this, right?
Correct.
And so what we did at Focus years ago, and actually our CMO, Lauren Barish, was one of the people who helped me do this for Moe's. Um, we figured out right away that you can take that brand book and the very front of it can be the stuff everybody needs. And then the back of it, like, maybe the back third or half of it is the stuff that's more technical for the
Yes.
people who need that too, right?
Yes.
So that you can do a 2-in-1 and maybe just print some of it for franchisees and the rest kind of
That's
is,
what we do.
yeah, right. So
It's like 150 pages, but
yeah,
franchisees only receive the front of the book. They
yeah,
don't need to
yeah.
know, well, we only use 60% green in our collateral. They don't need to know that.
Right. Yeah. They don't care. They don't care. But I'll tell you what, the promotional, the promotional gifts that they're buying from their local vendor, like that's going to become material at some point, and
Correct.
they can kick that over to a vendor and it's there, right? They can,
Exactly.
vendor knows how to go search through those things and find what they need.
Yeah.
Which all kind of goes back to this notion of systematizing and documenting and being consistent and setting the rails from the beginning, right? Whether it's ops or marketing or PR. One thing I want to talk about on your marketing, which this is true for a lot of emerging franchisors who don't yet have the benefit of a massive ad fund, right? You've only got a few franchisees who are
Sure.
contributing to that, and you've got a really lean and mean, scrappy budget. You guys have done an impeccably just wonderful job of managing your digital and like really going after digital as a strategy. Can you speak to us a little bit without spilling too much of your sort of secret sauce? Like, what are some of the things that you guys have been doing in the digital space to really maximize the return on investment of that ad fund to the benefit of the brand and the franchisees?
So we know exactly what we need to allocate in our markets for the max. I think this is where I think we talked about this too. Oftentimes, brands, their immediate solution is to throw money or bodies at the problem. And that's actually not the solution. With digital, you have to find a great agency. And when I say a great agency, I'm going to say it over and over again. Make sure that they are data focused. They need to be in your point of sale and in your numbers and looking at them consistently. Because if they're only looking at them on a periodic basis, right, whether it's monthly and or periodic, if you're on that calendar, that does nothing. They need to look at your numbers and have some kind of integrated system where they are allocating spend accordingly to the temperature of the business. So I would say very data focused, number one. The other thing too is you can find agencies that are a one-stop shop. And I think that is very much a wise decision for emerging brand, because what they'll provide to you is creative support. They know exactly what content is working for you, right? Because what they're doing is they're looking at the data consistently. Hey, we noticed that video is getting the most engagement. So, we're going to send somebody, or we're going to request from your team some video. Here's our plan. And then they are driving metrics around that. Agencies that are constantly looking at your data in real time means they can pull the lever in real time.
Yeah.
So I would suggest, so one of our key strategies is just always around that data. We know what content, we don't organic is great. People love organic social. Organic social is not going to drive traffic in your business if you're franchising. And by organic social, what I mean is you are a franchisee and or franchisor and you're posting on Instagram, your one post a day or whatever it is. Guess what? Your consumer is probably either never seeing it and or seeing it once. You have to maximize boosting and ad spend, because that allows the consumer to see it multiple times. A person needs to see advertising. I believe the number is seven times before it really registers for them and for them to maybe have some purchase intent. So you have to have content. You don't need to have 30 days of content. You could post 10 times a month, but if you spend the resources accordingly, the same person will see that advertising over time. So you don't need to spend a lot. You just need to spend right. And you need an agency that understands that methodology. And then you also have to I think the most important part, and this is what we learned about digital, not all agencies are alike, but just like development, you need to know and communicate your market to your agency. Your agency probably doesn't live in all of your markets. So one thing that we learned is radius was very important. So it's great that, oh, we're spending this amount of money and we're doing the standard, social media. But if I found out in some of my markets, well, I'm a destination, I can expand my marketing for maybe $200 more a month, but I'm hitting 50 miles and now I'm driving traffic and I'm up 20%. So that
Mhm.
little bit of spend is being, allocated elsewhere. And that evolves over time too. In a market where you just open, maybe your spend is right in its immediate territory because you want to get awareness in maybe a 7 mile radius. But over time, those people already know that you exist. So you have to keep evolving the digital to find new customers all of the time. And I think that's lost on folks is that they think they can manage Meta and Google, and you can't. You can't for a franchise system. You need experience. And this is one place I think a lot of people fail is they think they can do it internally. And a lot of people can develop great content, but they don't actually know the mechanics and the technicalities around Meta. And all of that changes all of the time. So finding somebody really experienced that knows the technicalities behind those platforms and is constantly looking at the data to make sure that they're driving traffic and that they can and there are systems out there where they can look at those and determine to some degree what foot traffic they've driven into the concept. All of that matters. So it's
Yeah. I couldn't agree more. It's driving traffic and driving sales, right? Which
yeah,
is ultimately, as you put it to me the other day on the phone, was that is the purpose of an ad fund at the end of the day, right?
correct.
You're ultimately like trying to drive sales, right? She said something else, which I just want to like kind of circle back to ops again. It's just the foundation of everything we do. Operational excellence first, driving sales second.
Yes.
I think that that is so important. Is that solid customer experience is what makes driving sales, accretive, if not exponential, because you're building on not just an existing customer base and expanding and driving their frequency of visit, right? You're also bringing in and inducing trial, and that feedback loop, especially for newly launched units, is so critical. I would argue that the grand opening spend is just as important as the grand opening execution. Like you can't afford to miss on either of them.
Can. And that's why, we do things different because we do focus on operational excellence first. We do not grand open until 3 to 4 weeks after they have soft opened because
Yeah.
we want the team to really get the understanding and the execution underneath them. You cannot, while training is great, right? And we can open the restaurant after 4 days of training. Do they have operational excellence after 4 days? No. And they don't have the throughput. So to go and drive $20,000 worth of marketing spend into and we also do our marketing over a week period just because we are, brunch and we're 7 to 2 hours. It's hard to we just can't push everybody in one day. So we do it, we step it out a little bit just to ease the pressure of throughput. Um, we make sure that they have the operations under them because listen, any concept, you open a new restaurant, that soft opening week, you're also identifying there are some people that should not be in this operation. So you have a little bit of turnover, you're rehiring, you're retraining, and we found that the sweet spot is really 3 to 4 weeks. And, we're incrementally growing sales at that time, getting awareness. We're marketing to this grand opening where they're getting, some kind of, free merchandise, or it's a charity, or it's, military eats free. And, we have all of these different levers that we pull that are really community driven. And it makes for a very successful grand opening that people want to attend, come back to, because they've either had a great experience in the soft opening phase or they had a really great experience even when we were rocking it out on grand opening day and have a line around the building. So it's really important that that operational standard and excellence is there before you just open the doors and have a great big party. You could lose more guests that way.
Right. And the support after, because a lot of these grand openings have crushing volume. I mean, for us, it sometimes
They
was
are
up to
crushing.
4 to 5 times a normal store day volume. And
Yep.
so I'm impressed with the fact that you, even as an emerging and fairly new franchisor, understand that is as a one-shot chance to impress in that local market what this brand is about. And that requires some additional operational support from the franchisor, literally just bodies in the field helping make sure the wheels don't come off the bus. I think that that's not something you typically see in an emerging franchisor, but it certainly is best in class. I think
Mhm.
what it says to me is that you are in this as a franchisor to really build strong relationships with your franchisees. And we were joking, franchise documents as a legal construct are often like the term of them, sometimes 15, 20 years, is longer than the average American marriage, right? So I want to shift this conversation at this point to how you view that relationship, and what are some of the like the really most important qualities you think as a franchisor that you guys are responsible for embodying in that half of the relationship?
So it's three things for me. Having just entered the space myself, right? Having never been in franchising before. So number one, it is a relationship. And one thing that I notice, especially when you're emerging, right? Because you're still developing that credibility. These are the pioneers of your brand. You have to be very high touch with them. So you
Mhm.
need to be transparent with them. You need to be accessible to them. Very important. And you need to provide them with support. If you don't have a support system as an emerging franchisor, I think you're going to be very hard pressed to be successful because we have gotten, this is the same compliment we've received from every discovery day. And then after every opening was the level of support and engagement from our corporate team. They never felt that they were alone in the process, whether it was construction, vendor relationship. My goodness, my first truck order is not going to arrive before training. My coffee machine doesn't have an electrical plug. What am I going to do? The health inspector's coming here. I mean, there are 1,000 different, I don't know how to market in a new location. I've never marketed a new brand before. Knowing that they have somebody that is accessible to them, that's going to respond, probably immediately, if not, same day, that is pretty transparent and open when, hey, we don't have the answer, but we're going to find out, and or we receive, hey, thank you for that feedback. It's something that we will consider and or make a change in. But then also just having all of those support functions really builds a relationship of confidence, and that they feel that they have individuals that they can turn to when it's challenging. And it's not just us. While we have very strict and controls and brand standards and guardrails in place, we talk about it from the lens of we're doing a service to the brand and the system and to you as a franchisee to ensure that you are the most successful. That has been probably the key in our relationships that we have received. It's really the support and the accessibility.
And you said something to me that I'd never heard before. So in the land that I am in, I am out fundraising and constantly like, right, have to talk about investors, and we have investor avatars. Like we know who a typical investor
Mhm.
is for full course.
Sure.
You said franchisee avatar, and I
Mhm.
thought that was so interesting. What I took from that is it's an implicit acknowledgement that not all your franchisees are going to be the same. They're all going to have different needs. And you might also have opportunities to learn from them differently and to cater to them differently. Talk to me about how you came up with that concept. I've literally never heard of this before. I love it though, because it makes so much sense. It's just something that I see in a different area of
Yep.
my business. But from a franchisor perspective, how does that help you and your team be a better partner to your franchisees by having those avatars?
Yeah, so we have them for twofold reasons. Number one, we have it for recruitment. Who do we want to bring into this system, right? So, we know we want a healthy blend of, experienced franchisees that maybe already are franchisees of other concepts. They know their markets very well, and they're looking for an opportunity to backfill their markets, and or, maybe they have team that they want to promote into a different space. So we have those avatars, right? They might be entrepreneurial, they may be experienced. But that also helps us on the training side as well as the operational side, because we know where we have to fill in the gaps. We know if they're an entrepreneur that's never come into the restaurant space before, well, number one, they have to have an operator that does. That's key. But there are going to be some learning challenges with them that they've never experienced before. They've probably never done finance for a restaurant concept. It's different than traditional accounting, and it's more granular than traditional accounting. Maybe they've never heard of local store marketing, but they're on the PTO. So, we have to train them a little bit differently, and we have to be ready to educate them differently but then you have an experienced franchisor or a franchisee that has a lot of operational knowledge. They want to bring their own ideas to the system, and you have to balance that relationship with understanding and getting feedback, but also, staying true to the brand standards. We have 3 franchisees now, and they are all extremely different avatars. No restaurant experience, franchise experience, and restaurant franchise experience. And I will say having all of those different avatars in the beginning, while challenging, helped us develop even better learning tools. And they helped us realize where the gaps in our own operational systems were. So we look at those avatars, again, a symbiotic relationship. We're learning from them just as much as we are teaching them, and it's just making the system that much stronger. And so this last opening that we went through last week was our easiest yet because we already had the prior experience of those other two openings. So when our team comes back from a new grand opening, they actually completely deconstruct the opening and they rebuild the training system, and they do this every single time. And that's learning. That's core learning.
Right? Like what worked, what didn't, how can we do better next time?
Correct.
Yep.
Correct.
Love it.
And then
Love
it's
it.
just going to continue to help us grow and identify what franchisees we want in the system.
Yeah. We're going to take some questions from the audience, but while we're waiting for those to come in, I want to ask you this question. Knowing what you know now, having been through this journey with now 3 franchisees, having a robust pipeline of more openings coming this year, next year, what are some potholes on this road that you want to kind of signal for other emerging franchisors? Like, hey, watch out over here, like avoid this mistake. What kind of advice do you want to give to the audience and anyone who's either considering becoming a franchisor or who is in this emerging stage and might just need a little bit of a roadmap?
Yeah, that's a great question, and probably the best question that you can ask. Yeah, have to always remember what brought you to the dance, right? So great concept, great people and great operational excellence. So you have to keep maintain those standards. I would say that some of the potholes, right? Scaling is really hard. It really is. And it's identifying, and it's actually quite frightening when you think about it, because you make this leap and you have a fiduciary responsibility to franchisees. And that is terrifying when you really think about it, because, there's one thing to make that, there's that level of risk in your own corporate, but you can kind of own that. But now you have other capital involved and other people that are running your brand. And I think in the beginning, we all think that there's a lot more that we need than we don't. And we try, again, we throw money and we throw bodies at the problem. So I think immediately when people think, I'm getting into franchising, how am I going to sell franchise? How am I going to sell these franchises to individuals? Where am I going to recruit them from? And it's very easy to get wrapped up in just services that, are FSOs, or development partners that, say they have a lot of experience in franchising. So just be very mindful of who those individuals are. Make sure that you vet them accordingly, because it's not necessarily what you need in the beginning. What you need in the beginning is your core people, because at the end of the day, franchisees that come into an emerging brand probably are a consumer first. They love what you do. They want to know why you're doing it, and they want to be a part of it. All of our franchisees have been guests first, all of them. And because they have this, just affinity for the brand, it's very viral. So you have to tap into that. And because they have that loyalty to the brand, they want to talk to the brand. They want to talk to the founder. They want to be a material part of it. So it's really easy to just kind of outsource all of these things and hope that it drives in a bunch of sales, but that's not really the solution to growing. So I think that's one of the first risks that we have in franchising is, just be mindful of who you allow to represent your brand, because the brand is yours and those external folks aren't always the ones that are best representatives of it. I would say this is probably the biggest one. You don't realize the foundational components that you need in place for a franchise. It's very easy to sell franchising. If you have a concept that has great unit economics, you could sell that all day long. But can you open them? And can you open them successfully? And can you make them profitable? Because that's your number one job as the franchisor. Your number one job, really your only job, is to make sure that the franchisee is successful. So you have to have process. Do you have that onboarding checklist, a development process? Do you have a process around selecting your real estate? Do you have vendors that can scale, or are you going to have this coffee vendor here and that coffee vendor there? Or can you be consistent? Do you have issues with supply chain? You need to ask yourself that. In the places that I just sold 40 franchise locations to, can I even get product there? That's a challenge. You have to ask yourself these things in the beginning. And do you have contract pricing? Is it consistent? Do you have a training platform? Do you have operational systems? Do you have people that can train and travel and open new locations? Do you know how to open a new market? I mean, these are all real questions that you need to solve before you open the doors on number one. And I know some people, Lauren, will tell me I'm crazy, that there's no way an emerging franchisee can afford this. You can be creative, and you have to be very resourceful as an emerging franchisor. But the more that you put in those foundational elements, the more successful you will be. If you just try to, we use the analogy all the time, build the plane in the air, it's going to crash really quickly.
Going Mach 5 with some duct tape on the wing.
You don't
I
realize all
wouldn't
the
know anything about that. No, you said it best. I know we're at time right now, so I have nothing to add to that. Nailed it. Amanda, thank you
You're
so
welcome.
much
It's my pleasure.
for just sitting down with us and really unpacking what we know to be just some absolute best in class practices for an emerging franchisor. And I am still super impressed by you, by the brand, what you guys have been able to do in just such a short period of time. And we just felt like this would be such a great example to really unpack some of those great strategies and tools and techniques that you have brought to the brand, that the brand has developed to really showcase what we know to be the awesome brand that you guys are. So thank you so much for your time today. I really appreciate it.
Thank you for the invitation.
Okay, guys, that wraps our Rising Tide for this month. Thank you for joining us. We will see you next month as we continue to dive into all things franchising. As always, if you have any questions or need help, please feel free to reach out to the Full Course team at fullcourse.com. We are here to serve. Thank you all and have a wonderful day. Thanks, Amanda.
Thank you, Lauren.
All right.